In the third age of Middle-earth, when the shadow of Mordor had long been vanquished and the reign of King Elisar brought peace to Gondor, there came a time when new darkness stirred in forgotten places. It was in the waning days of autumn that Gandalf the White arrived at the gates of Minas Tirith, his staff gleaming pale against the darkening sky. "My lord," spoke the wizard to Aragorn upon the throne, "there are tidings from the north that trouble me greatly. The rangers of the north speak of strange lights in the abandoned watchtowers of Rudor, and the elves of Rivendell have grown silent in their halls." The king's weathered face grew grave. "What manner of darkness do you suspect, Mithrandir?" "I know not yet, but the very stones of Amon Sul cry out in the night, and the Palantir of Orthanc shows me naught but shadow where once stood the watchtowers of old. We must gather those who can stand against such evil, for I fear the watchers that once served the Witch King have awakened, though their master be long destroyed." Thus began the summoning of the Fellowship's remnant and new allies alike, for the wizard's words carried the weight of doom, and none could ignore the call to arm when shadow threatened the realm once more. 7 days hence, there gathered in the great hall of Minas Tirith a company unlike any seen since the War of the Ring. Legolas of the Woodland Realm stood beside Gimli the dwarf, their unlikely friendship having endured the years. From Rohan came Éomer King, his golden hair now streaked with silver, bearing the sword of his father. Yet it was the presence of two others that gave Gandalf pause. Faramir, now steward of Gondor, bore upon his brow a strange mark, a silver star that gleamed with inner light. Beside him stood a woman clad in gray, her hood drawn low, but her voice carried the music of the Eldar when she spoke. "I am Nimrodel of Lorien," she said, though that name belonged to legend, "and I have come because the trees themselves whisper of an ancient evil stirring. The Watchers that once served the Nine have indeed awakened, but they serve a new master now, one who seeks to claim the abandoned seats of power left by the Nazgul." Aragorn leaned forward upon his throne. "Who dares claim dominion over such evil?" Gandalf's eyes grew dark. "That, my lord, is what we must discover. But I fear we face not merely the return of old enemies, but the rise of something far more dangerous, one who has learned from the failures of both Sauron and Saruman." The company departed at dawn, riding hard for the north, through lands that had known peace for nigh on 60 years. Yet as they passed through the gap of Rohan and into the Lone Lands, the very air seemed to thicken with malice. Birds fell silent in their flight, and even the hardy ponies of Rohan shied at shadows that held no substance. It was Legolas who first perceived the change. "The land weeps," he said softly, his keen elven sight piercing the gathering dusk. "Something has passed this way, leaving corruption in its wake." Gimli hefted his axe, the dwarf's warrior instincts sharp as ever. Aye, and whatever it was no creature of the light. The very stones recoil from its memory. As they crested the hill that led to the ancient watchpost of Amon Sul, Weathertop itself came into view. But where once had stood proud ruins touched by starlight, now rose a tower of black stone, wreathed in sickly green flames that cast no warmth. Upon its peak stood a figure in robes of shadow, and though they were yet far distant, each member of the company felt the weight of its gaze. "Behold," whispered Nimrodel, her fair face pale with fear, "one of the Watchers has indeed taken form once more. But see how it has grown in power. No longer bound to its master's will, it seeks dominion of its own." The company made camp in a hollow some miles from the corrupted tower. Yet even at such distance, the malevolent presence pressed upon their minds like a heavy weight. Gandalf warded their rest with words of power, but even his magic seemed diminished in the face of this new darkness. "Tell us truly, Mithrandir," said Éomer, his hand never straying far from his sword hilt. "What are these Watchers of which you speak?" The wizard's face was grave in the firelight. They were servants of the Nine, creatures of will and malice, given form through the power of the Nazgul. When the Witch King fell and the Nine were destroyed, I believed these watchers had passed into the void with their masters, yet it seems I was mistaken. Faramir touched the silver star upon his brow, and it pulsed with gentle light. In the archives of Minas Tirith, I have found ancient texts that speak of the Watchers as more than mere servant. They were said to be fragments of the Witch King's own spirit, cast out to guard his realm. If this is true, then perhaps, Nimrodel finished softly, they retain some portion of his power and knowledge, but freed from his domination, they seek to claim it as their own. A howl echoed across the wasteland then, neither wolf nor orc, but something far more terrible. The fire flickered and dimmed, though no wind stirred the air. They know we are here, Gandalf said, rising to his feet. We must move with the dawn before they can surround us. Unknown to the company, within the black tower of the corrupted Weathertop, a fell council was indeed taking place. 3 figures stood within a chamber wreathed in green fire, their forms wavering between substance and shadow. The first was tall and terrible, wearing a crown of black iron, the chief of the Watchers, he who had served as the Witch King's right hand. The wizard comes with companion. Its voice echoed like wind through empty halls. We must not allow them to interfere with our work. Let them come, hissed the second, a creature of spite and malice. What threat can mortals pose to us now that we are free? We, who have tasted the power of the Nine. But it was the third who spoke with the most venom. Fool, do you forget that it was mortals who brought down our master? We must be cunning, not merely strong. I have sensed one among them who bears a light upon his brow, one of the old blood of Númenor. Such power could prove useful. The chief watcher turned its burning gaze upon the third. What do you propose? Corruption, came the reply. Turn their strength against them. Let them come to us, and we shall make them our instruments, even as we were instruments to the Nine. In the depths of the tower, ancient mechanisms began to turn, and shadows with hungry eyes crept forth into the night, seeking the camp of the Fellowship. Dawn brought no relief, for the sun itself seemed dimmed by the malevolent presence that hung over the land. As the company prepared to depart their camp, Legolas suddenly drew his bow, his arrow nocked and gleaming. We are surrounded, he said softly. They come not with noise, creeping shadows given form. Indeed, from every direction came shapes of darkness, moving with purpose but making no sound upon the earth. These were not orcs or wolves, but the very shadows themselves, given malicious intent. Gandalf raised his staff, and light blazed forth from its crystal head. Back, he commanded. By the power of the secret fire, I command you, back. The shadows recoiled, but did not flee. Instead, they began to circle the company like wolves around prey, waiting for the wizard's strength to fail. We cannot remain here, Aragorn declared, though he had passed beyond mortal years and into legend. We must reach higher ground. Gimli hefted his axe with grim satisfaction. Then let us carve our way through these shadow spawn. I have not had a proper fight in years. The battle was joined with fury. Though the shadows bore no physical weapons, their very touch brought cold and despair. Yet the company fought with skill born of many battles, and slowly they began to win through toward a ridge of stone that rose above the surrounding plain. It was then that disaster struck, for as they fought, Faramir cried out and stumbled. The silver star upon his brow had begun to burn with painful light, and dark veins spread across his face. The mark! Nimrodel called in alarm. Something seeks to corrupt the light he bears. Upon the ridge, with shadows pressing close but held at bay by Gandalf's power, Nimrodel bent over the fallen Faramir. The silver star upon his brow now burned with alternating light and shadow, and his face twisted in agony. How comes he by this mark? She asked urgently. This is no mere ornament, but a thing of power. It appeared after the war, Aragorn replied, his healer's hands gentle upon his friend's fevered brow. Faramir said it came in a dream, a gift from the Valar for his service to the West. Gandalf's face was grim. Then we have been deceived from the beginning. No gift of the Valar would bring such torment. He bent close to examine the mark, and his eyes widened in recognition and horror. This is no blessing, but a trap laid long ago. The mark bears the sign of the Nazgul, specifically, the Witch King himself. Impossible, breathed Éomer. The 9 are destroyed. Their physical forms, yes, Gandalf replied. But I begin to see the depth of our enemy's cunning. This mark was placed upon Faramir not as a gift, but as a beacon, a way for the Watchers to find him, and through him to corrupt the very heart of Gondor. Nimrodal's fair face was pale with understanding, and if they can turn one so noble and pure to their will, then they will have achieved what even Sauron could not. Gandalf finished. The corruption of Gondor from within. From the Black Tower came a sound like laughter, echoing across the wasteland, and the shadows pressed closer still. Through the long watches of the night, Faramir tossed in fevered dreams, while the company kept vigil around him. In his mind, he walked through corridors of memory, but the walls were wrong. The doors led to places he had never been, and whispers followed his steps. You could rule them all, came a voice like silk over steel. King of Gondor, Lord of all the South, your brother is dead. Your father mad? Why should the throne not be yours? I desire no crown, Faramir replied within the dream, but his voice seemed weak even to himself. Yet you bear our mark, the voice continued, and suddenly he was not alone in the corridor. A figure approached, tall and terrible, wearing armor of black mail and a crown of iron. You have been chosen, Faramir of Gondor. Join us willingly, and we will give you power beyond imagining. But even as the Watcher spoke, another voice echoed in the Hall of Dreams, the clear, true voice of Gandalf. Remember who you are, Prince of Ithilien. Remember the White Tree of Gondor. Remember your oath to guard the West. The Watcher hissed in anger. The wizard meddles still, but no matter. The mark is set and cannot be undone. You will serve us, willingly or not. In the waking world, Faramir's eyes opened suddenly, and they blazed with silver light. No, he said firmly, and his voice carried the authority of the old Númenórean kings. I remember who I am and whom I serve. I am Faramir, son of Denethor, Prince of Ithilien, and Steward of Gondor, and I reject your dominion. The mark upon his brow flared once with terrible pain, then cracked like broken glass, its pieces falling away like silver snow. With the breaking of Faramir's mark, the shadows that had besieged them let out a collective shriek of rage and pain, dissolving into mist that fled before the growing dawn. But from the Black Tower came a roar of fury that shook the very foundations of the earth. They will come now with all their power, Gandalf said grimly. The subtle approach has failed them, and they will seek to overwhelm us with force. Then let them come, Éomer declared, his golden hair streaming in the morning wind. I have not ridden to war in many years, but I have not forgotten how to fight. Legolas tested his bowstring and counted his arrows. They will not find us easy prey. But it was Gimli who spoke the thought that was in all their mind. 7 against whatever dwells in that accursed tower. I like not those odds. 8, said Nimrodal quietly, and as she spoke, her form seemed to grow more solid, more real. And you forget, Master Dwarf, who stands among us. I am not merely Nimrodal of Lorien. I am she who has walked in the light of the 2 trees, who has heard the music of creation itself. Against the servants of darkness, such power is not lightly dismissed. They rode then against the tower, and the very earth seemed to rebel against their passage. Cracks appeared in the ground, sending up gouts of poisonous steam, and the air itself grew thick and hard to breathe. But they pressed on, for they knew that to falter now would mean the doom of all they held dear. As they drew near the tower's base, great stones began to rain down from above, hurled by invisible hands. Yet Gandalf's staff blazed with white fire, and the stones turned aside or crumbled to dust before they could strike. The tower's entrance stood open like a mouth waiting to devour, and from within came the sound of chanting in the black speech. The company entered with weapons drawn, following corridors that twisted and turned in ways that defied the tower's apparent size. At last they came to a great chamber at the tower's heart, and there beheld the three watchers in all their terrible majesty. They stood upon a dais of black stone, and between them hung a great seeing stone, not a palantir of the Númenórean, but something older and more fell. "So," spoke the chief of the watchers, its voice like the grinding of millstones, "the insects come at last to be crushed. Know that you face the inheritors of the Nine's power, and through us, the Shadow shall reclaim Middle-earth." "You are nothing but remnants," Gandalf replied, his staff blazing, "echoes of a defeated evil, clinging to forms you no longer have the right to wear." The second watcher laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Yet we have grown beyond what we were, wizard. Behold," it gestured to the stone between them, and within its depths appeared visions of corruption spreading across the land. Darkness creeping through Rohan, plague in Gondor, war in the north. "These are but phantoms," Aragorn said firmly, "lies meant to weaken our resolve." "Are they?" hissed the third watcher. "Look closer, King of Gondor. See how readily your people turn to darkness when hope fails them." But even as the watchers spoke, Nimrodel stepped forward, and her voice rang clear and true. "I see through your deceptions, servants of Shadow. You show not what is, but what you hope to bring to pass. Yet while light endures in Middle-earth, your victory is not assured." The battle was joined with fury, unlike any since the War of the Ring. The combat that followed was not merely one of swords and sorcery, but of will against will, light against darkness. The Watchers fought with weapons of shadow and despair, seeking to break the hearts of their enemies rather than their bodies. Yomer's sword blazed with the light of the setting sun as he stood against the first Watcher. But for every blow he struck, two more shadows took its place. Legolas and Gimli fought back to back, the elf's arrows finding their mark, while the dwarf's axe carved through shadow stuff. Yet still the enemy pressed them hard. It was Faramir who perceived the truth first. "The stone!" he called out. "They draw their power from the Seeing Stone. While it remains whole, they cannot be truly defeated." Gandalf heard and understood, turning his staff upon the dark palantir that hung between the Watchers, but they rushed to defend it, and their combined will was strong. "I cannot break through alone," the wizard called. "We must strike together." Then did Nimrodel reveal her true nature, for she began to sing in the tongue of the Eldar, and her voice carried within it the memory of starlight and the music that shaped the world. The shadows writhed and weakened at her song, and the Watchers cried out in pain. "Now!" she called, and Gandalf struck with all his might, his staff blazing like a star. The Seeing Stone cracked, then shattered. With a sound like thunder, the tower itself began to tremble. The three Watchers let out a final shriek of rage and despair as their forms began to dissolve. "This is not the end," cried their chief. "We are but the first of many. The shadow has deeper roots than you know." And with that, they were gone, dispersed like mist before the morning sun. As the black tower crumbled around them, the company fled into the clean air of dawn, but their victory was shadowed by the Chief Watcher's final word. In the ruins of what had once been Weathertop, they gathered to make sense of what they had witnessed. Deeper roots, Gandalf mused, his face troubled. What could they have meant? It was then that Nimrodel spoke, and her voice carried within it both sorrow and hope. "There is something I have not told you, my friends. I am indeed Nimrodel of Lorien, but not as you understand it. I am she who was lost long ago while attempting to sail west, lost, but not destroyed. Instead, I have wandered in the twilight places between light and shadow, learning secrets that perhaps I should not know." She paused, gathering her courage for what must be said. The Watchers spoke truth. They are not the only servants of shadow to survive the War of the Ring. In the far south, in the lands of Harad, that were never cleansed of Sauron's influence, something stirs. Not a Dark Lord seeking dominion, but something far more subtle. Corruption spreading like a plague, turning the hearts of men from within. then our work is not finished." Aragorn said grimly. "No," Gandalf replied, "but we have struck the first blow, and proven that even the shadows of the Nine can be overcome. And now we know that Nimrodel walks among us once more, she whose song once turned back the darkness at the bridge of Khazad-dûm in the Elder Days." "The bridge?" Gimli asked in confusion. "But that was—" Nimrodel smiled sadly. "A tale for another day, friend dwarf. For now, know that the Watchers never rest, but neither do the Guardians of the Light. And while both endure in Middle-earth, there remains hope against the darkness." As the sun rose fully over the restored Weathertop, now cleansed of shadow, the company prepared to return to Minas Tirith. Their first battle was won, but all knew it would not be their last. In the south, new shadows were gathering, and the true test of their resolve was yet to come. But that, as Nimrodel had said, was a tale for another day. Thus ends the first chronicle of the Watcher, but their vigil continued. For in Middle-earth, the price of peace is eternal vigilance, and the Guardians of the Light must never rest, lest the darkness return to claim what it has lost. Epilogue. The Eternal Vigil, the return to Minas Tirith. The white walls of Minas Tirith gleamed like silver in the morning sun as the company crested the final hill of their long journey home. 40 days had passed since the fall of the corrupted Weathertop, 40 days of careful travel through lands still healing from the Shadow's touch. Behind them, the North Country bore new scars, but also new hope. For where the Watcher's influence had been broken, green things grew again with unusual vigor, as if the very earth rejoiced in its freedom. Aragorn rode at the head of their small procession, his weathered face bearing the weight of kingship renewed. The victory at Weathertop had been complete, yet the Chief Watcher's final words echoed still in his mind. "The shadow has deeper roots than you know." Even now, as they approached the City of Kings, ravens brought troubling news from the southern borders, reports of strange dreams plaguing the people of Lebanon, of livestock found dead without wound or disease, of wells that ran black despite flowing clear the day before. Beside the king rode Gandalf the White, his staff dim now in the daylight, but ready to blaze forth should darkness threaten. The wizard's keen eyes missed nothing, not the nervous glances of the gate guards, nor the whispered conversations that ceased as their party approached, nor the subtle signs of corruption that lingered like a disease in the very stones of the outer city. The shadow they had faced in the north had been but a symptom of something far greater, and Gandalf feared they had arrived home only to find the true battle just beginning. The Council of the Wise. 3 days after their return, a great council convened in the Hall of Fire within the Citadel. Present were not only the heroes of Weathertop, but also the greatest minds remaining in Middle-earth. Círdan the Shipwright had come from the Grey Haven, bearing with him scrolls of ancient lore. From Lothlorien came Lady Galadriel herself, her presence filling the hall with a light that seemed to push back the very shadows cast by torch and candle. And from Rivendell, though Elrond had long since passed into the west, came his sons Elladan and Elrohir, their faces grave with the weight of dark tidings. It was Galadriel who spoke first, her voice carrying the music of ages long past. "The mirror has shown me visions most disturbing," she said, her blue eyes reflecting depths of knowledge that mortal minds could barely comprehend. In the south, in the forgotten places where Sauron's servants once bred their armies, something stirs that is neither of the enemy nor entirely separate from him. It feeds upon the remnants of ancient evil, growing stronger with each passing day. Círdan nodded gravely, his ancient hands unrolling a map marked with strange symbol. The Watchers you faced were indeed connected to this greater darkness, but they were merely its eyes and ears in the north. The true threat lies here. He pointed to a region far to the south, beyond even the borders of Mordor, in the land called Khan, where the shadow never fully lifted. Nimrodel, who had remained silent throughout much of the council, now spoke with a voice heavy with sorrow. "I have walked in the twilight places between worlds, and I have seen the truth of what grows there. It is not a Dark Lord in the manner of Sauron or Morgoth before him, seeking to dominate through fear and force. This is something far more insidious, a corruption that spreads through the very fabric of Middle-earth itself, turning the natural order to darkness and decay. The prophecy of the last alliance. As the council deliberated through the long watches of the night, it was Faramir who brought forth a discovery that would change everything. The former steward of Gondor entered the hall bearing an ancient tome, its pages yellow with age, and its binding cracked with the weight of centuries. "My lords and ladies," he said, his voice tight with the gravity of his discovery. "While searching the deepest archives of the Tower of Ecthelion, I have found this, a prophecy written by Isildur himself in the final days before his death." He opened the book carefully, revealing pages covered in the flowing script of the Númenórean. It speaks of a time when the Nine's shadow shall birth a new darkness, one that feeds not upon the rings of power, but upon the very life force of Middle-earth itself. Gandalf leaned forward, his eyes bright with sudden understanding. "Read on, Prince of Ithilien. What else does Isildur foretell?" Faramir's voice grew stronger as he continued. "In that day, the Lightbearers must unite as never before, for the enemy shall not come as conqueror, but as corrupter, turning the very foundations of creation against themselves. Only through the sacrifice of the pure and the wisdom of the ancient shall the last shadow be cast down and Middle-earth be cleansed forever." A silence fell over the council as the weight of these words settled upon them. Here was prophecy speaking directly to their present crisis, written by one who had witnessed the downfall of the greatest Dark Lord Middle-earth had ever known. Lady Galadriel's voice cut through the stillness like a silver bell. "The sacrifice of the pure," she repeated softly. "I fear I begin to understand what may be required of us." The mustering, the last alliance word, went forth from Minas Tirith with the speed of eagles on the wing. From every corner of Middle-earth, the call went out. Not for armies this time, for no force of arms could stand against the corruption they faced, but for all those who bore within them the light of the elder days. The message was the same wherever it was carried. The final battle between light and darkness approached, and all who would see Middle-earth endure must come to the aid of the West. From the Grey Havens came the last ships of the elves, bearing with them the remnants of Gil-galad's host. From the Lonely Mountain rode Dain III, son of Thorin, leading a company of dwarf warriors whose axes had been blessed by the fires of Erebor. The eagles of Manwë descended from their eyries, and at their head flew Gwaihir the Wind Lord, ancient and proud. But perhaps most surprising of all was the arrival of a company from the east, men of Rhûn and Khan, who had thrown off the Shadow's influence and now sought to make amends for their people's long service to darkness. At their head rode a woman of striking beauty and terrible resolve, calling herself Morwen the Redeemed, who claimed to have once served the mouth of Sauron before finding the light. "I have seen what grows in the deep places of my homeland," she told the assembled council. "It is a thing of hunger without end, a void that seeks to devour all life and leave only emptiness in its wake. My people call it the Unnamed Dread, for to speak its true name is to invite its attention." As the various companies arrived, the White City began to transform. No longer was it merely the capital of Gondor, but the staging ground for what all recognized would be the final confrontation between the forces of creation and destruction. The vision of the Palantir. On the eve of their departure southward, Aragorn made a decision that many counseled against. He looked into the Palantir of Minas Tirith, seeking to understand the full scope of the threat they faced. What he saw there would haunt him for the remainder of his days. In the Seeing Stone's depths, he beheld a land transformed beyond recognition. Where once the realm of Khand had been harsh but living desert, now stretched an emptiness that hurt the eyes to look upon. The very air seemed to writhe with malevolent purpose, and at the center of it all stood a structure that defied description. Neither tower nor palace, but something that seemed to exist in more dimensions than mortal minds could grasp. But it was not the sight of this abomination that struck terror into the king's heart. It was the realization that the corruption was spreading. like ripples in a dark pond. Waves of emptiness radiated outward from the central horror, leaving behind them a wasteland where nothing would ever grow again. At the current rate of expansion, he calculated, the void would reach the borders of Gondor within a year, and Middle-earth itself would be consumed within a decade. "We cannot wait for the enemy to come to us," he declared to the assembled leaders. "If we are to have any hope of victory, we must strike at the heart of this darkness before it grows beyond all possibility of defeat." The March of the Last Army. The army that set forth from Minas Tirith in the final days of autumn was unlike any that had ever marched across the fields of Middle-earth. At its head rode the King of Gondor and Arnor, bearing Andúril reforged and the banner of the White Tree. Beside him walked Gandalf the White, his staff blazing with the light of the secret fire, and Nimrodel of Lorien, whose very presence seemed to strengthen the hearts of all who looked upon her. Behind them came the greatest warriors of the age, Éomer, King of Rohan, with his golden-helmed riders, Legolas of the Woodland Realm, and Gimli, the Dwarf Lord. Their friendship now legend, the twin sons of Elrond, with their company of Noldorin knights, Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth, with the Swan Knights of his house. But for all its might, this was not truly an army in the traditional sense. Many of those who marched bore no weapons, save staves of power or ancient artifacts of the elder days. Elrond's daughter Arwen had come from Rivendell, bearing with her the Evenstar itself, not the jewel she had given to Aragorn, but the great star glass of Arundel that had once lit the way through the darkness of Ungoliant's spawn. As they marched southward through Ithilien and beyond, the very land seemed to respond to their passage. Flowers bloomed out of season where their feet had passed, and the malaise that had settled over the southern regions lifted wherever they went. Yet always ahead of them, like a wall of absolute darkness, lay the growing void that threatened to swallow all of creation. The threshold of despair. For 40 days and 40 nights they marched, and with each passing league, the signs of the corruption grew more apparent. Rivers ran backward in their beds, flowing uphill toward the source of the darkness. The sun itself seemed dimmed, as if some force were drawing away its light and warmth. Most disturbing of all were the refugees they encountered, men, elves, and even animals, fleeing northward, terror in their eyes. Speaking of dreams that drove them mad, and visions of a hunger that could never be satisfied, it was on the 40th day that they crested a ridge and beheld their destination in all its terrible glory. Before them stretched what had once been the fertile valley of Khan, now transformed into a landscape of absolute desolation. The very air shimmered with wrongness, and at the valley's heart stood the thing that defied description, a structure that seemed to exist simultaneously in the physical world and in realms beyond mortal perception. "Behold," whispered Gandalf, his voice heavy with dread, "the nameless void, the hunger that would devour existence itself. Here is the final trap that Sauron laid for Middle-earth, not a weapon of conquest, but one of absolute destruction." As they watched, tendrils of nothingness reached out from the central horror, touching anything they encountered and leaving behind only emptiness. Trees, rocks, even the very earth itself simply ceased to exist where the void's influence reached. Lady Galadriel stepped forward, her mirror clutched in her hands, and spoke words that chilled the blood of all who heard them. "It seeks not to rule Middle-earth, but to unmake it entirely, to return all of creation to the void that existed before the music of the Ainur. If it succeeds, not even the memory of our world will remain." The final gambit. That night, as they camped on the threshold of despair, the leaders of the last alliance held their final council. The situation was clear to all. No force of arms could defeat something that existed partially outside of reality itself. Their only hope lay in the ancient prophecies and the wisdom of those who had walked in the light of the two trees. "There is a way," Nimrodel said at last, her voice barely above, "but the cost will be terrible beyond measure." She turned to face the assembled heroes, her fair face streaked with tears. "The void feeds upon existence itself, drawing strength from everything that is. But there is one force it cannot consume, the willing sacrifice of one who has looked upon the undying land and chosen to remain in Middle-earth. Understanding dawned in Gandalf's ancient eyes. You speak of the flame imperishable, the secret fire that burns at the heart of creation itself. But to wield such power would mean the end of all who bear it, Nimrodel finished. Yet without such sacrifice, the void will grow until it devours not only Middle-earth, but all the circles of the world. Even Valinor itself would not be safe. It was then that Aragorn spoke, his voice steady despite the weight of what he proposed. Then we know what must be done. I am the king of Gondor, and Arnor, heir to Isildur, who cut the ring from Sauron's hand. If the blood of Numenor can serve to save Middle-earth one final time, then let it be so. But before any could respond to the king's offer, 9 figures stepped forward from the ranks of the assembled army. These were the Nazgûl, not the corrupted wraiths they had once been, but their original forms, cleansed and restored through arts beyond mortal understanding. The Witch King himself, now bearing his true name of Ernir, last king of Gondor, spoke with a voice free of shadow for the first time in millennia. My lord Elessar, the debt is ours to pay. We who brought this doom upon Middle-earth through our acceptance of Sauron's gifts must be the ones to end it. We have been given this chance for redemption, and we will not waste it. The breaking of the void. What followed was not a battle in any sense that mortal minds could comprehend, but a contest of fundamental forces that shook the very foundations of reality. As the 9 redeemed Nazgûl advanced toward the heart of the void, their forms began to blaze with a light that was not of Middle-earth. The light of their souls finally freed from the shadow that had bound them for so long. The void reacted with fury beyond description, lashing out with tendrils of absolute nothingness that sought to unmake the approaching figure. But they could not be stopped, for they bore within them now the willing sacrifice that the prophecy had foretold. The sacrifice of the pure who chose to give up their existence so that others might live. Behind them, the army of the Last Alliance added their strength to the effort. Gandalf raised his staff and spoke words of power in the tongue of the Valar, while Galadriel held high her mirror, reflecting the light of Arundil's star into the heart of the darkness. The elves sang the song of creation, the same music that had shaped the world at the beginning of time, while the dwarves struck the earth with their axes, calling upon the strength of Aule the smith. As the 9 reached the threshold of the void itself, their leader, the former Witch King, turned back one final time to face those who watched. Tell the tales truly, he called, his voice carrying clearly despite the cosmic forces raging around them. Tell how in the end, even the servants of darkness found redemption, and how love proved stronger than the shadow. And with those words, the 9 stepped into the heart of the void, and their sacrifice blazed forth with such intensity that it could be seen from the Tower of Icthelion itself, hundreds of leagues away. The cleansing fire. The destruction of the void was not violent in any conventional sense. Rather, it was as if reality itself suddenly remembered what it was supposed to be. The wrongness that had infected the land simply ceased to exist, replaced by the natural order that had been meant to hold sway. Where the abomination had stood, a spring of clear water bubbled up from the earth, and around it, flowers bloomed with impossible beauty. But the victory came at a cost beyond measure. The 9 who had given their lives were gone beyond recall, their sacrifice complete and final. Yet, in their passing, they had not only saved Middle-earth, but cleansed it of the last remnants of the shadow that had plagued it since the Elder Day. As the army of the Last Alliance stood in the restored valley, watching the sun rise over a world finally free of darkness, they felt a change in the very air itself. The malaise that had hung over Middle-earth like a shroud for centuries was gone, replaced by a sense of renewal and hope that touched every living thing. The Age of Restoration. In the years that followed, Middle-earth experienced a renaissance unlike any seen since the Elder Days. The sacrifice of the 9 had not only cleansed the world of shadow, but had somehow strengthened the barriers between the physical realm and the dark places beyond. No longer would creatures of malice find it easy to cross into the circles of the world, and the healing that began in the valley of the former void spread outward like ripples on a pond. The free peoples prospered as never before. The realm of Gondor expanded southward into lands that had been barren waste, now transformed into gardens of surpassing beauty. Rohan's horses multiplied and grew stronger, as if the very grass they fed upon had been blessed. The elves, who had long prepared to fade from Middle-earth, found their strength renewed, and many chose to remain rather than seek the Grey Havens. But perhaps the greatest change was in the hearts of all who dwelt in Middle-earth. The constant threat of shadow that had haunted the world for so long was gone, replaced by a certainty that good would triumph over evil, so long as brave souls were willing to stand against the darkness. The Memorial of the Nine. In the place where the void had stood, Aragorn commanded that a memorial be built, not to celebrate victory, but to honor the sacrifice of those who had made it possible. 9 pillars of white stone were raised, each bearing the true name of one of the redeemed Nazgul, and at their center flowed the spring that had appeared at the moment of their sacrifice. It became a place of pilgrimage for people from all corners of Middle-earth, for the water of the spring was said to have healing properties beyond any herb or medicine. More importantly, it served as a reminder that no one was beyond redemption, and that even the darkest soul could find the light, if they were willing to pay the price. Gandalf the White often came to this place in the years that followed, and he would sit by the spring for hours, sometimes speaking to the stones, as if the spirits of the 9 could still hear him. When asked what he said to them, he would only smile and reply, "I tell them that their sacrifice was not in vain, and that Middle-earth remembers." The passing of the Guardians. As the years turned to decades, the heroes of the last alliance began to feel the weight of their long service. One by one, they laid down their burdens and sought their final rest. Eomer King died in his sleep, dreaming of great horses running free across endless plain. Gimli the dwarf passed away in the deep halls of Aglarond, his axes crossed upon his breast, and a smile on his weathered face. Legolas eventually felt the call of the sea and sailed west with the last ship from the Grey Haven. But before he departed, he planted a tree in the memorial garden, a Malorn sapling from Lothlorien that grew to magnificent size and was said to sing with the voices of the 9 when the wind passed through its leaves. Aragorn ruled for 120 years, longer than any king in the history of Gondor. And when he finally laid down his crown, it was with the knowledge that the realm he left behind was stronger and more peaceful than it had ever been. His final words, spoken to Faramir, who had become his closest friend and counselor, were simple. The watch is ended, and the watchers may rest at last. The song that never ends. But if the watchers were finally able to rest, their legacy lived on in the songs and stories of the people. Bards throughout Middle-earth sang of their deeds, and children learned their names before they could properly walk. The tale of the Watchers became more than mere history. It became the foundation myth of a new age, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, hope could be found if one knew where to look. Nimrodel, alone among the heroes, chose to remain in Middle-earth indefinitely. She established a school in the restored valley where the void had been, teaching young people from all the free peoples the ancient lore and wisdom that would be needed to guard against any future darkness. The watch never truly ends, she would tell her students. It only passes from one generation to the next, and each must be ready to take up the burden when their time comes. And so Middle-earth entered its 4th age, in peace and prosperity, but also in readiness. For while the great shadow had been cast down forever, the people remembered the price of freedom and remained vigilant against any threat that might arise. The Watchers had done their duty, and now it fell to their children and their children's children to carry on the eternal vigil. In the end, perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Not merely the defeat of evil, but the creation of a world where good people stood ready to defend what they cherished. where the lessons of the past were remembered and honored, and where the light of hope burned eternal in the hearts of all who called Middle-earth home. The Watchers never rest, but in their sleepless vigil, all others may sleep peacefully, knowing that the darkness has been banished forever, and that the age of shadow has finally, truly come to an end.